True strength isn't about feeling nothing. It's about feeling everything without being destroyed. Marcus Aurelius conquered the Roman Empire while mastering his inner world, and his 10 principles can transform your emotional chaos into unshakable power in just 30 days. Have you ever had that feeling? You wake up in the morning, and before you even open your eyes, there's already a weight pressing on your chest. The mental checklist starts running. That presentation today, the conversation you've been avoiding, the bills piling up. Your day hasn't even started and you're already exhausted by it. You're not alone. Studies show that 84% of people live in what psychologists call emotional autopilot, reacting to life's events without conscious choice, carried along by habitual responses they developed years or even decades ago. It's like driving a car while half asleep, letting muscle memory and old patterns determine your route. What if I told you there's another way to experience life? Not by changing your circumstances, but by transforming your relationship with them. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's not a magical pill or a single epiphany that suddenly makes you emotionally bulletproof. Instead, it's a gradual journey, one where the most important signs of progress often go completely unnoticed. That's the paradox that even the ancient Stoics struggled with. Take Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome. Here was a man who ruled the known world, who had access to every luxury and comfort imaginable. Yet in his private journal, never intended for publication, we find him writing the same reminders to himself over and over again for decades. Even after years of practice, he still needed daily reinforcement of the principles that kept him sane amidst the crushing pressure of imperial responsibility. Why? Because emotional mastery isn't a destination, it's a practice. And like any practice, from playing an instrument to physical fitness, progress happens in subtle increments that are easy to miss. I call this invisible progression, transformations that happen beneath the surface of your awareness. The irony is that chronic anxiety itself blinds us to our own growth. When you're constantly scanning for threats and problems, you're neurologically programmed to overlook signs of improvement. Your brain is literally wired to miss your own progress. So how do you know if you're actually becoming emotionally stronger? What are the subtle signs that your Stoic practices are working, even when you don't feel dramatically different? The first and perhaps most important sign is so subtle most people miss it entirely. You begin to notice the pause between stimulus and response. Let me explain what I mean. Right now, try a quick experiment with me. Think about the last time someone cut you off in traffic, or a colleague sent you a passive-aggressive email, or your partner said something that pushed your buttons. What happened in your body and mind in that moment? For most people, the reaction is instantaneous. A surge of adrenaline, a tightening in the chest, an automatic thought pattern, and then a habitual response. But as you begin developing emotional resilience, something remarkable starts to happen. A tiny space emerges, a microsecond of awareness between the triggering event and your reaction to it. This pause might be so brief you barely register it at first, but it's the seed of all emotional freedom. In this infinitesimal gap lies the entirety of human choice and dignity. As Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps and later developed his own philosophy influenced by Stoicism, famously wrote, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." For the next 3 hours after watching this video, I want you to try something. Observe how many times you react automatically to situations, the email notification that immediately pulls your attention, the critical comment that instantly triggers defensiveness, the traffic jam that automatically sparks frustration. Just notice, without judgment, how many of your emotional responses happen on autopilot. This simple awareness exercise is actually the beginning of profound neurological change. You're activating your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function. and beginning to weaken the automatic pathways of reaction that have been strengthened through years of habitual use. This is the crucial difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is automatic, unconscious, and based on past conditioning. Responding is conscious, deliberate, and rooted in present awareness. One is mechanical, the other is fully human. As you continue your practice, you'll start to identify micro moments of choice in your day-to-day life. That instant when your phone rings and you feel a pang of anxiety, there's a pause there, almost imperceptible at first, but growing larger with practice. The moment your child or partner says something triggering, you'll begin to catch yourself before the automatic reaction takes over. The key to recognizing this progress is self-observation without judgment. This is harder than it sounds. We're conditioned to be our own harshest critics, to focus on failures rather than subtle improvements. When you react automatically for the 1000th time, it's easy to think, I'm not making any progress. This isn't working. This is where many people fall into the trap of comparison, either to some idealized version of themselves or to others who seem to have it all figured out. But here's the truth. You won't necessarily feel different even when you're changing. Progress isn't always felt. Sometimes it can only be observed. I remember working with a professional who had been struggling with imposter syndrome for years. After 3 months of consistent Stoic practices, she complained that nothing had changed. But when I asked her to review the journal entries she'd been keeping, she was shocked. Situations that used to derail her entire day were now barely footnotes. Problems that once kept her awake at night were being processed and resolved in hours instead of days. She was changing dramatically. She just couldn't feel it from the inside. This brings us to an important distinction between mere awareness and what Stoics practiced as true active presence. Mindfulness, as commonly taught today, encourages being present in the moment. Stoic mindfulness takes this further. It's about being present, but not imprisoned by the moment. It's observing your experience while simultaneously maintaining perspective on it. Think of it like watching a movie. Regular mindfulness might be fully immersed in the film, experiencing every emotion. Stoic mindfulness is like simultaneously enjoying the movie while also being aware you're sitting in a theater watching light projected on a screen. Both experiences are happening at once: immersion and perspective. These signs of progress I'm describing are subtle, but they're essential for recognizing the path ahead. Without acknowledging these small victories, it's easy to get discouraged and abandon practices that are actually working beneath the surface of your awareness. Let me give you a practical way to spot this first sign of progress. Tonight before bed, take 3 minutes to reflect on your day. Ask yourself, were there any moments today when I caught myself before reacting automatically? Any tiny pauses where I had a choice even if I didn't take it? Write down even the smallest instances. This simple act of reflection accelerates your progress by reinforcing the neural pathways you're trying to strengthen. Remember, noticing the pause doesn't mean you'll always make the optimal choice in that moment. You might still react habitually many times. But the mere awareness of the gap is the first sign that your emotional operating system is being upgraded. It's like installing new software. There will be glitches and reversions to the old system, but the new code is definitely taking hold. As you cultivate this awareness, you'll begin to experience moments of choice in situations that previously ran on autopilot. This is the foundation of emotional resilience, not the absence of triggers, but the growing ability to choose your response to them. But there exists a second sign even more powerful than the first. That moment when a situation that would have previously devastated you for days now only bothers you for minutes. It's what the Stoics called the first victory. And I'm going to show you exactly how to identify when this starts happening to you. That first victory over your automatic reactions begins with a seemingly simple question, one that has the power to transform how you experience every challenge in your life. what exactly is within my control right now? This question is the foundation of what Epictetus, a former slave who became one of history's greatest philosophers, called the dichotomy of control, the clearest dividing line between unnecessary suffering and genuine peace of mind. But what does control really mean? The answer might surprise you. Most of us walk around with a deeply flawed understanding of control. We believe we control our health, our career trajectory, other people's opinions of us, and countless other outcomes that, in reality, we can only influence at best. This misunderstanding is the source of an enormous amount of unnecessary pain. Consider Epictetus's remarkable story. He was born a slave in ancient Rome, literally someone else's property. His master once decided to torture him by slowly twisting his leg until the bone snapped. As the story goes, Epictetus calmly watched and said, "You will break it." And when the bone finally cracked, simply added, "There, I told you so." Despite losing his physical freedom and even control over his own body, Epictetus discovered something profound. While he couldn't control his circumstances, he maintained absolute sovereignty over his responses to them. This insight became the foundation of his teaching, and it can transform your life through a remarkably simple exercise I call the two lists technique. Take a moment right now, yes, actually pause the video, and think about your biggest current source of stress. Got it? Now, draw an imaginary line down the middle of a page and write "under my control" on one side and "not under my control" on the other. For example, if you're stressed about a job interview, what belongs on each list? Under your control, your preparation, your attitude, how you present yourself, the questions you ask. Not under your control, whether they like you, if another candidate is more qualified, if the position gets cancelled, or if the interviewer is having a bad day. Did you make your lists? If you did this exercise honestly, you've likely discovered something remarkable. Approximately 89% of what causes your suffering comes from wrestling with things on the "not under my control" list. We exhaust ourselves fighting battles that cannot be won. This realization isn't just philosophically interesting. It creates an immediate shift in how you experience stress. People consistently report feeling lighter after this exercise, as if a burden has been lifted. That's because you're no longer carrying the impossible weight of outcomes you cannot determine. Here's where many people get confused. There's a crucial difference between influence and control. You might influence many things: other people's opinions, your health outcomes, your career progression, but influence is not control. Control means complete determination of outcome, and that exists only in your chosen responses, judgments, and actions. This distinction transforms difficult relationships instantly. Imagine that colleague who always triggers you with passive-aggressive comments. Before, you might have exhausted yourself trying to change them or make them like you. With the dichotomy of control, you realize their behavior is not under your control. Your response to it is. This simple shift moves you from victim to empowered actor in your own life. The same applies at work. When your project depends on other team members, their contributions aren't under your control. Your communication, your own work quality, and your contingency planning are. This isn't about lowering expectations. It's about directing your energy where it can actually make a difference. The immediate effect of this practice is what I call cognitive load reduction. Your brain is constantly processing thousands of variables. By eliminating the mental strain of trying to control the uncontrollable, you free up enormous cognitive resources. This is why people report feeling physically lighter after practicing this distinction. The second sign that you're developing emotional resilience is when you begin making this division automatically. You'll catch yourself in the middle of a stress spiral and naturally think, wait, what part of this can I actually control? This mental reflex doesn't develop overnight. But when it appears, it's a clear indication that the Stoic operating system is being installed in your mind. I've seen this principle transform how people handle even the most serious life challenges. Consider someone receiving a difficult medical diagnosis. Initially, the mind races with all the uncontrollables. Why me? What if the treatment doesn't work? What will others think? But with the dichotomy of control, focus shifts entirely to what can be controlled. Following treatment protocols, maintaining a supportive mindset, researching options, building a support system. This shift doesn't change the diagnosis, but it dramatically changes the experience of facing it. And remarkably, focusing exclusively on what you can control often improves outcomes in ways that worrying about uncontrollables never could. You'll also notice something fascinating about how time feels when you're practicing this principle. Problems seem to last much shorter periods. Why? Because much of what extends our suffering is not the initial problem, but our resistance to accepting what we cannot change. When you stop fighting reality and focus solely on your response, recovery happens much faster. This brings us to an important psychological distinction: active acceptance versus passive resignation. Many people mistakenly believe that accepting what we cannot control means becoming a doormat or giving up. Nothing could be further from the truth. Passive resignation says, there's nothing I can do, so why bother? Active acceptance says, I cannot control this circumstance, so I will focus all my energy on what I can control within it. One is defeat, the other is strategic redeployment of resources. One leaves you feeling helpless, the other empowers you precisely because you're no longer wasting energy. Take a moment right now to practice this. Think of something that's been bothering you recently, a situation where you felt stuck or frustrated. Draw that mental line. What aspects can you absolutely control? What aspects are beyond your control? Make a conscious decision right now to release your grip on everything in the second category. How does that feel? For most people, there's an immediate sense of relief, even if the situation itself hasn't changed. This is the beginning of what Stoics called apatheia. Not apathy as we understand it today, but freedom from disturbing passions. It's emotional freedom that comes not from controlling the world, but from mastering your responses to it. I've worked with leaders who transformed their entire approach to business using just this principle. One executive was constantly stressed about market conditions, competitor moves, and economic forecasts, all factors largely outside her control. When she restructured her entire workday around the dichotomy of control, she began spending 80% of her time on variables she could influence directly: team development, innovation processes, customer relationships. Within 6 months, her division's performance improved dramatically, and more surprisingly, her stress levels dropped by half. This principle works just as powerfully in personal relationships. When you stop trying to control how others feel or behave, an impossible task, and focus instead on bringing your best self to each interaction, relationships naturally improve. You become less needy, less reactive, and more genuinely present. But merely knowing what you control is not sufficient for true emotional resilience. It's the necessary foundation, but we need to build upon it. Awareness must be paired with preparation. And this is where most modern approaches to emotional management fall short. They focus on coping with difficulties as they arise, rather than systematically preparing for them in advance. The Stoics understood something profound about human psychology. We suffer twice with most challenges, first in anticipation and then in experience. Often the anticipatory suffering is worse than the actual event. But what if you could eliminate both types of suffering through deliberate mental rehearsal? Think about how elite athletes or special forces operators prepare for high-stakes situations. They don't just practice the skills needed. They mentally rehearse facing and overcoming specific challenges. They deliberately expose themselves to simulated stress to build resilience before the real test arrives. The Stoics developed a similar practice over 2,000 years ago, and modern psychology has confirmed its remarkable effectiveness. It's what Seneca called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, though I prefer to call it the mental vaccine technique. The principle is simple but counterintuitive. By deliberately visualizing potential difficulties in advance, you inoculate yourself against their emotional impact when, or if, they actually occur. Just as a vaccine introduces a small, controlled dose of a pathogen to build immunity, this practice introduces controlled doses of adversity to build emotional resilience. Many people confuse this practice with pessimism or catastrophizing, but the difference is crucial. Pessimism dwells passively on what might go wrong. Catastrophizing spirals into worst-case scenarios without solution. The mental vaccine, by contrast, is active, controlled, and solution-focused. You're not just imagining problems, you're rehearsing your poised response to them. This distinction is neurologically significant. Anxiety-based anticipation activates your amygdala and triggers stress hormones. Constructive mental rehearsal, however, activates your prefrontal cortex, the rational planning center of your brain. One depletes your resources, the other strengthens them. The third sign of your growing emotional resilience appears when you notice yourself being less surprised by difficulties. When challenges arise and you think, "I'm prepared for this," rather than, "Why is this happening to me?" That's the mental vaccine at work. But knowing about this technique isn't enough. You need to experience it to understand its power. So let's practice it together right now with something that's coming up in your life. Think of an important situation you'll face in the next few days. A difficult conversation, a presentation, a decision. Now, take 30 seconds to visualize one specific thing that could realistically go wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, just normally, predictably challenging. Got the scenario? Good. Now, instead of avoiding the discomfort of this possibility, lean into it. Imagine it happening in detail. See yourself in that moment. What would you feel? What would you think? Most importantly, how would you respond effectively? Visualize yourself handling this challenge with poise, employing your Stoic practices, focusing on what you can control. When you practice this technique consistently, something remarkable happens. Situations that would have previously triggered intense emotional reactions begin to feel manageable. Not because you've suppressed your emotions, but because you've prepared your mind to process them differently. The science behind this is compelling. Studies show that this type of anticipatory visualization can reduce emotional intensity by up to 63% when challenging events actually occur. Your brain has already processed the scenario and developed response pathways, so it doesn't experience the same shock when faced with the real situation. I've seen this technique transform how people handle everything from public speaking anxiety to difficult family gatherings. One entrepreneur I worked with used to experience debilitating stress before investor meetings. After practicing the mental vaccine technique for just 2 weeks, visualizing specific challenging questions and rehearsing his composed responses, he reported not only feeling calmer, but actually performing better because his mind wasn't clouded by anxiety. The power of this practice extends to personal relationships as well. By visualizing potential misunderstandings before important conversations, you can prepare yourself to respond with patience rather than reactivity. Many conflicts escalate not because of the initial disagreement, but because of unprepared emotional responses to it. To make this practical, I recommend creating your own resilience preparation protocol, a brief daily practice that takes less than 3 minutes. Each morning, ask yourself, what's the most challenging situation I might face today? Visualize one specific difficulty, feel the emotions it would trigger, and rehearse your ideal response. This isn't about expecting the worst. It's about being prepared for whatever comes. The beauty of this practice is that it builds cumulative resilience. Each visualization strengthens your neural pathways for composed response, making you progressively more prepared, not just for the specific scenarios you rehearse, but for unexpected challenges as well. But preparing for difficulties is only half of the equation. The next essential step is developing perspective, the ability to see challenges in their proper proportion. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How ridiculous and how strange to be surprised at anything which happens in life." His solution was a practice performed at dawn each day, looking up at the stars to gain what he called the view from above. This technique of expanded perspective is like having a mental superpower to zoom out when life zooms in too close. And I'm going to show you exactly how to develop this capacity in just 30 seconds, even in the middle of your most chaotic moments. This negative visualization technique seems like pessimism, but it's actually the opposite. It's what the Stoics called premeditation of evils, a mental practice that, despite its ominous name, is actually one of the most powerful tools for creating genuine peace of mind. Seneca, one of Rome's wealthiest men and a renowned playwright, had everything money could buy. Yet every evening, before retiring to his luxurious bed, he would deliberately visualize losing it all: his wealth, his status, even his loved ones. Why would someone so fortunate engage in such an apparently morbid exercise? Because he understood something profound about human psychology that modern science has only recently confirmed. Our minds confuse preparation with catastrophizing, yet they produce dramatically different results. Think about the last time you were anxious about an upcoming event, perhaps a job interview or a difficult conversation. Your mind likely ran through worst-case scenarios automatically. What if I freeze up? What if they hate me? What if I get rejected? This isn't preparation. It's anxious rumination that depletes your mental resources and often makes the feared outcome more likely. What Seneca practiced, and what I'm about to teach you, is fundamentally different. It's a controlled, intentional mental rehearsal that activates completely different neural pathways. The difference between anxiety-based anticipation and constructive mental rehearsal is like the difference between frantically worrying about a storm and calmly boarding up your windows. One leaves you exhausted and unprepared, the other leaves you ready for whatever comes. Let me share the exact protocol. Each morning, take just 3 minutes to deliberately visualize one specific challenge you might face that day. Not catastrophically, but realistically. If you have an important presentation, imagine your slides failing. If you're having dinner with difficult family members, visualize specific triggering comments that might arise. But here's the crucial part. Don't stop at imagining the problem. See yourself responding with composure, drawing on your Stoic principles, focusing on what you can control. Visualize yourself breathing steadily, maintaining perspective, and choosing a constructive response. Let's practice this together right now. Think of something potentially challenging coming up in the next 24 hours. Got it? Now, for just 30 seconds, imagine one specific thing that could realistically go wrong. See it happening in detail: the setting, the people involved, the specific problem. Now, rather than avoiding the emotional discomfort this creates, lean into it. Feel what you would feel if this happened. Notice the sensations in your body. Next, and this is where the magic happens, visualize yourself responding with calm strength. Not emotionless, but emotionally balanced. See yourself using the dichotomy of control, separating what you can and cannot influence. Imagine the specific words you might say, the posture you would adopt, the perspective you would maintain. Did you do the exercise? If so, you've just practiced what Seneca considered essential daily mental training. And you might have noticed something interesting. There's a subtle but distinct difference between how this felt compared to your normal worried thinking. There's a sense of agency, of preparation, rather than panic. The third sign that you're developing emotional resilience appears when challenging situations surprise you less. When difficulties arise and your internal response shifts from, "Why is this happening to me?" to, "I'm prepared for this." That's this practice working. You've inoculated yourself against the emotional shock that typically accompanies unexpected problems. I worked with an entrepreneur who was preparing for her first major pitch to investors. Naturally, she was terrified. Instead of generic reassurance, I guided her through this practice daily for 2 weeks before the presentation. Each morning, she visualized different specific problems, her slide deck failing, being interrupted with hostile questions, blanking on key numbers. For each scenario, she rehearsed her composed response. When the actual pitch day came, something remarkable happened. Her projector did fail, one of the exact scenarios she had mentally rehearsed. Rather than panicking, she smoothly transitioned to handouts she had prepared as backup. The investors were so impressed with her composure under pressure that they mentioned it specifically when they decided to fund her company. What's happening neurologically when you practice this technique? Research shows that your brain doesn't fully distinguish between vivid visualization and actual experience. When you mentally rehearse handling a challenging situation, you're literally creating neural pathways that you can access when facing the real challenge. It's like installing software that runs automatically when needed. Studies from sports psychology show that athletes who combine physical practice with mental rehearsal outperform those who only train physically. The same principle applies to emotional resilience. By mentally rehearsing difficult scenarios, you're training your emotional responses just as an athlete trains their muscles. One crucial distinction: this practice is not about expecting the worst. It's about being prepared for whatever comes. As Seneca wrote, "He who has prepared will be least surprised." You're not increasing the likelihood of negative outcomes by visualizing them. You're decreasing their impact if they occur. The science supporting this approach is substantial. Research shows this type of anticipatory visualization can reduce emotional intensity by up to 63% when challenging events actually occur. Your brain has already processed the scenario, so it doesn't experience the same alarming novelty when faced with the real situation. Perhaps the most powerful application of this technique is in relationships. Most relationship conflicts escalate not because of the initial disagreement, but because of unprepared emotional responses. When someone says something hurtful, our automatic reaction often makes the situation worse. Try this. Before your next potentially difficult conversation, spend 2 minutes visualizing specific triggering statements the other person might make. Feel the emotional reaction that would normally arise, then visualize yourself responding with patience and clarity instead of defensiveness or counterattack. This simple practice can transform the most challenging relationships in your life. I remember working with a woman who had a historically difficult relationship with her mother-in-law. Their holiday gatherings were predictably tense. After practicing this technique before family events, specifically visualizing common triggering comments and rehearsing composed responses, she reported a breakthrough. When her mother-in-law made the exact critical comment she had visualized, instead of feeling ambushed by emotion, she felt prepared. She responded with calm curiosity instead of defensiveness, completely changing the dynamic between them. You might be wondering, doesn't constantly thinking about negative possibilities make me more negative? It's a reasonable concern, but the evidence suggests the opposite. Regular practitioners report significantly lower baseline anxiety. Why? Because you're not leaving your fears in the dark, where they grow stronger. You're bringing them into the light, where they can be examined and addressed. Think of it like exposure therapy for anxiety. By voluntarily exposing yourself to controlled doses of anticipated difficulties, you systematically desensitize your emotional response. The fear loses its power over you. To make this practical, I recommend creating your personal Resilience Preparation Protocol. A brief daily practice that takes less than 3 minutes. Each morning, ask yourself, what's the most challenging situation I might face today? Select one specific scenario, visualize a realistic difficulty, feel the emotions it would trigger, and rehearse your ideal response. That's it. 3 minutes that can transform your entire day. The beauty of this practice is that it builds cumulative resilience. Each visualization strengthens your neural pathways for composed response, making you progressively more prepared, not just for the specific scenarios you rehearse, but for unexpected challenges as well. This is where modern psychology and ancient Stoicism align perfectly. What Seneca called premeditation of evils, psychologists now call stress inoculation training, a well-validated approach for building emotional resilience. The terminology has changed, but the core insight remains the same. Mental rehearsal creates mental strength. Remember, this isn't about becoming pessimistic. Quite the opposite. It's about developing such robust mental preparation that you can afford to be optimistic. When you know you can handle difficulties, you no longer need to fear them. The premeditation practice pairs perfectly with the dichotomy of control we discussed earlier. As you visualize potential challenges, you're simultaneously practicing the mental separation between what you can and cannot control in each scenario. This combined approach creates what psychologists call realistic optimism, positive expectation backed by practical preparation. I've seen this technique transform how people handle everything from public speaking anxiety to medical procedures to financial setbacks. One client was facing potential layoffs at his company. Instead of spending weeks in a state of anxious paralysis, he used this technique to visualize receiving the news, feeling the impact, and then implementing his contingency plan. When the layoff actually came, he reported feeling strangely calm. The emotional shock had been largely processed in advance, allowing him to move directly into constructive action. What's most remarkable about this practice is how it changes your relationship with uncertainty itself. Most anxiety stems from our intolerance of uncertainty, the desperate need to know what will happen. But uncertainty is an inescapable part of human existence. Rather than futilely trying to eliminate it, this practice teaches you to become comfortable functioning within it. As you continue this practice, you'll notice something fascinating. Your resilience extends beyond the specific scenarios you've rehearsed. You develop a general confidence in your ability to handle whatever arises. It's like a musician who practices scales. The benefit isn't limited to playing those specific patterns, but extends to overall musical fluency. To maximize the effectiveness of this technique, combine it with physical practices that reinforce mental resilience. When visualizing challenging scenarios, pay attention to your breathing. Practice maintaining slow, steady breaths, even as you imagine stressful situations. This creates a powerful mind-body connection that you can access during actual challenges. Another enhancement is to create mental anchors, simple phrases or images that encapsulate your prepared response. After visualizing handling a difficult situation well, condense that response into a brief phrase like, "I have options," or "this will pass." These become powerful mental shortcuts during real challenges. The premeditation practice becomes even more powerful when combined with reflection. At the end of each day, briefly review any challenges you faced. Compare your actual responses with your visualized ideal responses. This creates a feedback loop that continuously refines your resilience. What about chronic worriers? If you already spend too much time anticipating problems, how is this different? The key distinction is containment and conclusion. Unlike open-ended worry, this practice has clear boundaries. 3 minutes, one scenario, with a specific focus on constructive response. You're not ruminating, you're rehearsing. Start small if this practice feels overwhelming. Begin with minor challenges rather than your biggest fears. As you experience the benefits, gradually apply the technique to more significant concerns. Like any skill, this one develops progressively. Remember that preparation doesn't guarantee any specific outcome. Life will still surprise you. The goal isn't to predict every possible challenge, but to develop such robust internal resources that you can meet any challenge with equanimity. As you make this practice part of your daily routine, you'll begin to notice subtle but profound changes in how you move through the world. Situations that once seemed threatening now appear as opportunities to exercise your growing strength. You'll find yourself leaning into challenges rather than avoiding them, curious about your capacity rather than fearful of your limitations. But preparation for difficulties is only half of the equation. The next essential step is developing perspective, the ability to see challenges in their proper proportion. When something upsets you, your mind naturally zooms in, making that single event fill your entire field of vision. But what if you could zoom back out, seeing that event as just one tiny dot in a vast landscape? This perspective-expanding technique is what Marcus Aurelius practiced each dawn, looking up at the stars to gain what he called the view from above. It's like having a mental superpower to zoom out when life zooms in too close. And I'm going to show you exactly how to develop this capacity in just 30 seconds, even in the middle of your most chaotic moments. This technique of perspective expansion is like having a mental superpower to zoom out when life zooms in too close. It's what Marcus Aurelius practiced at dawn each day, looking up at the vastness of the sky to remind himself of his place in the cosmos. And while it might sound abstract or philosophical, it's actually one of the most practical tools you can use in the middle of a stressful day. Let me explain why this matters so much. When you're stressed, your brain quite literally narrows its focus. Neuroscientists call this perceptual narrowing. Your field of vision actually constricts, and your thinking becomes tunnel-visioned on the problem at hand. It's an evolutionary adaptation that helped our ancestors focus on immediate threats. But in modern life, it often makes situations feel more overwhelming than they truly are. Think about the last time you received a critical email or comment. In that moment, how big did that problem feel? For most people, a single negative interaction can expand to fill their entire mental space. The presentation that didn't go well becomes, "My career is over." The argument with your partner becomes, "Our relationship is doomed." This is your brain zooming in too close, losing all perspective. Marcus Aurelius understood this tendency of the human mind and developed a specific antidote that he practiced religiously. In his private journals, he wrote, "Survey the circling stars as though yourself were in mid-course with them." He was describing what Stoics called the view from above, a deliberate mental exercise of zooming out to see your situation from progressively wider perspectives. Here's how to practice this technique in just 30 seconds, even in the middle of a challenging situation. First, become aware of your current perspective. Notice how close you're zoomed into the problem. Next, imagine floating upward, as if rising above your current location. From 10 feet up, see yourself and the situation. Notice how it already looks slightly different. Continue rising to 100 feet, then 1,000 feet. See the building you're in, the neighborhood, the city becoming smaller. Keep expanding. See your country, the continent, the Earth as a blue marble in space, the solar system, the galaxy. Finally, from this cosmic perspective, look back at your original situation. Notice how its proportions have changed in your mind. Let's try this right now with something that's been bothering you recently. Take a moment to bring to mind a situation that's causing you stress, perhaps a work challenge, a relationship difficulty, or a personal worry. Got it? Now, for just 20 seconds, practice the mental zoom out I just described. Start with your close-up view of the problem, then gradually expand your perspective until you're viewing it from the vastness of space. Did you try it? Most people report an immediate shift in how they feel about their problem. Not that it disappears, the view from above doesn't eliminate challenges, but it resizes them appropriately. What felt all-consuming moments ago now appears as one small element in a much larger context. The fourth sign that you're developing emotional resilience is when you begin asking yourself, will this matter in 5 years? This question is the practical distillation of the view from above technique. It's a mental shortcut to perspective that you can use anywhere, anytime. What's happening in your brain when you practice this perspective shift? Neuroimaging studies show something fascinating. The brain regions associated with negative emotions, particularly the amygdala, show reduced activity, while areas associated with cognitive perspective taking become more active. In other words, your brain literally cools down emotionally when you expand your perspective. This technique isn't about dismissing your problems as unimportant, it's about accurately sizing them. Think of it like adjusting the zoom on a camera to capture the full scene rather than just one pixel. You're not ignoring the pixel, you're seeing it in its proper context. I remember working with someone who had just been passed over for a promotion they had worked toward for years. Understandably, they were devastated. The situation consumed their thoughts entirely. We practiced the view from above together, progressively expanding perspective from that single career moment to the full span of their professional life, to their whole life, including relationships and personal growth, to the broader human experience shared by billions. Afterward, they said something profound. The pain is still there, but it doesn't feel like the whole story anymore. They could still acknowledge the legitimate disappointment, while simultaneously recognizing it as one chapter in a much larger narrative. This perspective shift allowed them to respond strategically rather than reactively to the setback. The practical applications of this technique are endless. In meetings when tensions rise, a quick mental zoom out helps you respond to the content rather than react to the emotion. In traffic, when someone cuts you off, the cosmic perspective reminds you this is a tiny blip in your day, not worth sacrificing your peace of mind. In family conflicts, asking, "How will we view this 10 years from now?" often diffuses tension immediately. This perspective shift is particularly valuable for decision-making. We often make poor decisions when zoomed in too close to immediate concerns. The view from above helps you distinguish between what's urgent and what's truly important. Ask yourself, when I look back on this moment in 10 years, what decision will I wish I had made? The technique works equally well with positive experiences. Next time you're enjoying a beautiful moment, perhaps watching a sunset or sharing laughter with loved ones, try mentally zooming out to see this moment as one bright point in the vast tapestry of existence. Many people report that this practice actually enhances their appreciation rather than diminishing it. To make this technique part of your daily life, create visual reminders in your environment. Some people keep a small picture of Earth from space on their desk or as their phone background. Others use specific moments, like walking through doorways or stopping at red lights, as triggers to practice a quick perspective shift. The view from above pairs powerfully with the dichotomy of control we discussed earlier. When you zoom out, you gain clarity about what aspects of a situation you can and cannot control. Problems that seemed hopelessly entangled at close range often separate clearly into controllable and uncontrollable elements when viewed from a distance. One particularly effective application is creating what I call perspective anchors. Brief phrases that instantly trigger a wider view. Phrases like, "This is just one moment," "in the grand scheme," or "from a distance," can serve as mental shortcuts to the full technique. What distinguishes this practice from simple positive thinking or denial is its grounding in reality. You're not pretending problems don't exist. You're seeing them accurately within their true context. It's precision, not avoidance. I've seen this technique transform how people handle everything from minor irritations to life-altering challenges. One person facing a serious illness described how the cosmic perspective helped them balance the gravity of their situation with a sense of peace. My illness is real and significant in my life, but from the perspective of the universe, it's a small chapter in a vast story. That doesn't make it unimportant, but it makes it bearable. The view from above also creates a unique form of connection with others. When you regularly practice expanding your perspective, you naturally begin to see how your story intertwines with countless other human stories. This fosters what Stoics called cosmopolitanism, a sense of belonging to the whole human family rather than just your immediate group. You might be wondering if this technique might make you too detached or unemotional. The opposite is true. People who regularly practice the view from above report feeling more genuinely connected to what matters, precisely because they're no longer as reactive to what doesn't. It's like clearing away static to hear the true signal. To deepen this practice, combine it with physical cues. Some find that physically looking up at the sky or ceiling helps trigger the mental expansion. Others use their hands, starting with fingers close together near their eyes, representing the zoomed-in view, and gradually moving their hands apart and away, representing expanding perspective. As with any Stoic practice, the view from above becomes more powerful with repetition. The neural pathways strengthened through regular practice make perspective shifting increasingly automatic. What begins as a deliberate exercise gradually becomes a natural mental reflex in challenging situations. One of the most beautiful aspects of this technique is how it connects us with our Stoic predecessors across time. When Marcus Aurelius looked up at the stars over 2,000 years ago, seeking perspective on his imperial troubles, he was engaging in exactly the same psychological process available to you right now. The human mind works remarkably similarly across millennia. Try this experiment. For the next 3 days, set a reminder to practice the view from above for 30 seconds at 3 specific times: morning, midday, and evening. Notice how this regular perspective reset affects your overall emotional state. Most people report a significant reduction in stress and an increased sense of clarity about what truly matters. Remember, this practice doesn't diminish the importance of your goals or concerns. It actually helps you pursue what matters more effectively by freeing you from emotional reactivity to minor setbacks. As Seneca noted, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. The view from above helps you discern where your limited time and energy truly belong. The perspective practice becomes particularly powerful when facing fears. Most fears shrink significantly when viewed from an expanded perspective. Ask yourself, how will this look 1 year from now, 5 years from now, at the end of my life? These questions don't invalidate present concerns, but help calibrate their appropriate emotional weight. This brings us to an important reality. Perspective on life is impossible without acknowledging its finite nature. The most powerful perspective shift comes from what the Stoics called memento mori, remembering that you will die. This awareness isn't morbid, it's the ultimate clarifying force for how you choose to live. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you could leave life right now, let that determine what you do and say and think. This recognition of life's brevity doesn't lead to panic or despair, but to a profound appreciation for the time we have and the wisdom to use it well. The 7th sign of growing emotional resilience appears when you begin to develop what the Stoics called tranquility of mind, not through the absence of problems, but through the presence of something much deeper. Marcus Aurelius had a daily ritual to cultivate this quality, and I'm going to show you how to adapt it for just 4 minutes each morning. This active acceptance is completely different from passive resignation. When we talk about amor fati, loving what happens, many people misunderstand this as some kind of surrender or giving up. Nothing could be further from the truth. What Epictetus was teaching, even as someone literally in chains, was perhaps the most revolutionary idea in emotional resilience. We can accept reality completely while simultaneously working to change what we can. The story of Epictetus himself illustrates this perfectly. Born into slavery in ancient Rome, he had no control over his circumstances. His master, annoyed by his philosophical tendencies, once cruelly twisted his leg until it broke, permanently crippling him. In that moment, Epictetus demonstrated the very principle he would later teach. Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. This brings us to a crucial distinction that many modern approaches to emotional management miss entirely. There's a profound difference between accepting reality and accepting its effects on you. Accepting reality means acknowledging what is actually happening without denial or fantasy. It doesn't mean you like it, approve of it, or will allow it to continue if you can change it. It simply means you stop fighting the fact that, in this moment, this is what is. Think about the last time you were stuck in terrible traffic. Most people waste enormous energy raging against the reality. This shouldn't be happening. I don't have time for this. But notice how this mental resistance creates double suffering. You have the original problem, being in traffic, plus the added suffering of fighting against what already is. The traffic doesn't care about your resistance. It remains. Only you suffer from the fight. I want you to try a short exercise right now. Think of something in your life that you've been resisting. Something you wish weren't true but is. Perhaps a health issue, a difficult colleague, or a financial constraint. Now, just for this moment, try what I call the as-if test. Treat this reality as if you had chosen it. Not because you want it or because it's good, but simply to see how different your relationship with it feels when you drop the resistance. Did you try it? Most people report an immediate sense of shifted energy. Not because the problem disappeared, but because they stopped spending energy fighting its existence and can now direct that energy toward constructive response. The fifth sign of growing emotional resilience appears when you stop asking, "Why me?" when difficulties arise. This victim question traps you in a perspective of helplessness. Instead, you begin to ask more empowering questions. How can I respond to this effectively? Or even, what strength might this difficulty be building in me? This shift is neurologically significant. Brain imaging studies show that mental resistance to unpleasant realities activates the same pain centers as physical resistance to threats. When you fight reality, your brain processes it as danger, triggering stress hormones that impair clear thinking precisely when you need it most. Consider how this applies to professional challenges. When you receive critical feedback, the natural reaction is resistance. They're wrong. They don't understand. But those who practice amor fati take a radically different approach. They think, this feedback exists regardless of whether I like it. Now, what can I learn from it? This doesn't mean the feedback is entirely accurate or fair. It simply means you accept its existence as a starting point for response rather than wasting energy denying it. I worked with someone facing a serious health diagnosis. Initially, they spent weeks in anguish, not about the treatment plan, but about the sheer unfairness of the situation. Why me? I've taken care of my health. Through practicing amor fati, they reached a profound realization. Whether this is fair or unfair is irrelevant to my healing. It is happening. Now, how will I respond? This acceptance didn't magically cure them, but it freed up enormous psychological resources previously consumed by resistance, allowing them to fully engage with their treatment and recovery. This brings us to the Stoic paradox that confuses many people. You can fully accept current reality while simultaneously working to change it. In fact, true acceptance is often the prerequisite for effective change. As the saying goes, you must start where you are, not where you wish you were. Think of it like swimming in a powerful river. Fighting directly against the current exhausts you quickly. Accepting the current's reality allows you to work with it, finding ways to navigate toward your destination that use the water's power rather than opposing it. A powerful practice for developing this mindset is what I call the inverted gratitude journal. Instead of listing the obviously good things in your life, challenge yourself to find the hidden gifts in what initially appears negative. Had a project fail? Perhaps it taught you crucial lessons that will prevent larger failures later. Dealing with a difficult person? They might be developing your patience and communication skills in ways that will serve you for decades. Take 30 seconds right now to apply this to a current challenge. What might be the hidden gift in a difficulty you're facing? What strength might it be building in you? What opportunity might it be creating that you can't yet see? This isn't toxic positivity or pretending everything is wonderful. It's about developing the capacity to extract value from reality as it is, not as you wish it were. The Stoics were pragmatists, not optimists. They didn't believe everything happens for the best. They believed in making the best of everything that happens. The ability to identify the hidden opportunity in adversity is perhaps the most practical superpower you can develop. Studies of post-traumatic growth show that people who find meaning in difficulties actually emerge stronger than they were before facing those challenges. Not despite the hardship, but because of how they engaged with it. I remember someone who lost their job during a company downsizing. After the initial shock, they applied amor fati, accepting the reality completely. This has happened. Now, what's next? Rather than spending months bitter about the layoff, they immediately redirected that energy into launching the consulting business they had been dreaming about for years. 3 years later, they were earning more, working fewer hours, and experiencing greater fulfillment than their former job ever provided. What seemed like disaster became the forcing function for positive change, not automatically, but through the conscious practice of acceptance and response, rather than resistance and reaction. A common objection to this approach is, but if I accept difficult situations, won't I become complacent and stop trying to improve things? This misunderstanding stems from confusing acceptance with resignation. Acceptance is active and empowering. Resignation is passive and defeating. Think of it this way. Acceptance says, this is the reality I'm starting with, while resignation says, this is the reality I'm stuck with. One is a launching pad, the other is a prison cell. The Stoics were anything but passive. Marcus Aurelius led armies and governed an empire. Seneca wrote influential plays and advised emperors. Epictetus, once freed from slavery, established a school that influenced generations. They weren't sitting in caves contemplating their navels. They were fully engaged with the world, but from a place of acceptance rather than resistance. To develop this capacity in your daily life, create small acceptance practices for minor annoyances. When someone cuts you off in traffic, consciously say to yourself, this has happened. I accept that it has occurred. Notice how different this feels from your typical reaction. When technology fails during an important presentation, state the reality. The slides aren't working right now. I accept this fact. Then move directly to response. These small practices in low-stakes situations build the mental pathways that serve you when facing life's bigger challenges. Another powerful technique is physical acceptance. When facing something difficult, notice where you feel tension in your body. That physical tension often reflects mental resistance. Consciously relax those areas while saying, I accept that this is happening. The mind-body connection works both ways. Physical acceptance facilitates mental acceptance. The beauty of amor fati is that it works at any scale, from minor irritations to life-changing events. Whether you're dealing with a delayed flight, a difficult conversation, or a major health challenge, the principle remains the same. Accept what is, then respond from that acceptance. This acceptance creates what psychologists call psychological flexibility, the ability to stay present, open, and engaged regardless of what's happening around you. Studies show this quality correlates strongly with mental health, relationship satisfaction, and professional success. As you develop this capacity, you'll notice an interesting shift in how difficulties affect you. The initial emotional spike from challenging events becomes less intense and fades more quickly. It's not that you don't feel anything. Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotions. It's that you process emotions more efficiently because you're not adding the secondary suffering of resistance. Remember that acceptance doesn't mean you stop at acknowledging what is. It means you start there. Once you've accepted reality as it is, you're in a much stronger position to change what can be changed. As Epictetus put it, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Try this for the next week. Whenever something unwanted occurs, no matter how small, say to yourself, "This has happened. I accept that it is now reality." Notice how this tiny pause changes your relationship with the situation and creates space for a more considered response. But accepting the present is only part of the equation. Many people master present acceptance, but still suffer greatly from anxiety about the future. This brings us to another dimension of emotional resilience: your relationship with what hasn't happened yet. Most of us live in a state of anticipatory anxiety, constantly rehearsing potential problems without actually preparing for them. We create suffering now about difficulties that may never materialize. But what if you could transform this relationship with the future entirely? The sixth sign of emotional resilience appears when your relationship with the future changes fundamentally. You stop living in anxious anticipation and begin practicing what the Stoics called preparation without worry. Seneca had a specific technique for this, and it involves 3 questions that I'm going to teach you right now. This shift in your relationship with the future culminates in a practice that seems morbid at first glance, but is actually the most liberating of all. The Stoics called it memento mori. Remember that you will die, not as a dark cloud hanging over your life, but as the brightest spotlight illuminating what truly matters. Why do we instinctively avoid thinking about our mortality? It's not just cultural taboo, it's hardwired. Our brains are designed to protect us from threats, and death represents the ultimate threat. Yet this avoidance comes at an enormous cost. We live as if we have unlimited time, postponing what matters while squandering precious days on the trivial and meaningless. Seneca understood this psychological blind spot perfectly. In his letters, he wrote, "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." Think about that for a moment. We fear losing our job next month while planning retirement 50 years from now. We worry about a stranger's opinion while putting off calling the people we love most. This cognitive dissonance creates a life of misplaced priorities and inevitable regret. Seneca practiced a daily ritual to counter this tendency. Each evening, he would review his day as if it might have been his last, not from a place of anxiety, but of assessment. Did he use this day well, knowing it was finite? He advised, "Before promising another man, promise yourself." His point was clear. We readily commit our limited time to others while breaking promises to ourselves about how we intend to live. This brings us to a crucial distinction between existential anxiety and existential clarity. Anxiety about death comes from vague, unfocused fear, the monster under the bed we refuse to look at directly. Clarity comes from bringing death into the light, examining it calmly, and using its reality to sharpen our choices. One paralyzes, the other empowers. Let me teach you a powerful exercise called the last time practice. Think of an ordinary experience you had recently, perhaps your morning coffee, a conversation with a loved one, or even your commute to work. Now imagine if you knew with certainty it was the last time you would ever have that experience. How would you approach it differently? What details would you notice? What gratitude might you feel? Take 15 seconds right now to try this with something simple from your day to day. Did you try it? Most people report an immediate shift in perception. The ordinary suddenly becomes extraordinary when viewed through the lens of finitude. This isn't about becoming morbid or obsessed with death. It's about using death's reality to crack open the shell of habit that numbs us to the miracle of being alive right now. The sixth sign of growing emotional resilience appears when you begin systematically eliminating the trivial from your life. You stop majoring in minor things. Decisions that once paralyzed you with anxiety now become clearer because you're filtering them through the ultimate clarifying question. Given that my time is limited, does this deserve my attention? The neuroscience behind mortality awareness is fascinating. Studies show that conscious contemplation of death activates brain regions associated with meaning-making and values-based decision-making. Unlike unconscious fear of death, which activates stress responses, conscious engagement with mortality actually helps your brain prioritize what truly matters. In practical terms, mortality awareness serves as what I call a finitude filter for daily decisions. When deciding how to spend your Saturday, whether to have that difficult conversation or if you should finally pursue that long-held dream, the awareness of limited time cuts through confusion like nothing else. I remember working with someone who had spent 15 years in a career they found meaningless but secure. After practicing memento mori for just 1 month, simply asking each morning, "If this were my last year, would I spend it this way?" They found the clarity and courage to make the career change they had postponed for over a decade. 3 years later, they described it as finally beginning to live rather than just exist. This perspective transforms relationships perhaps more powerfully than any other area. Imagine approaching each interaction with loved ones from the awareness that neither of you is guaranteed tomorrow. Not in a fearful way, but in a way that burns away the petty irritations and trivial disputes that consume so many relationships. Would you really care about who loaded the dishwasher incorrectly if you truly absorbed that your time together is limited? Try this experiment. For the next 3 days, before any interaction with someone important to you, take 3 seconds to remind yourself, neither of us will be here forever. Notice how this tiny reminder changes the quality of your presence and what you choose to focus on in the conversation. This brings us to a fascinating paradox. Mortality awareness doesn't diminish your experience of the present, it dramatically enhances it. When you recognize that your moments are numbered, each one becomes more precious, not less. You develop what psychologists call temporal scarcity. The recognition that time, unlike money, cannot be earned back once spent, making it your most valuable resource. I've had people share remarkable stories about how this practice transformed their lives. One person described how, after years of postponing travel with their aging parent, the memento mori practice gave them the clarity to prioritize these trips immediately. The memories they created in those final 2 years became their most cherished possession after their parent passed away. Another powerful application is the 5 regrets exercise, inspired by palliative care nurse Bronnie Ware's famous observations of the most common regrets of the dying. Take 5 minutes to imagine yourself at the end of your life, looking back. What would you regret not doing, not saying, not becoming? This isn't morbid fantasy, it's strategic foresight. When you identify potential regrets while you still have time to avoid them, you gain what few people ever experience: the opportunity to live regret-free. Not because you never made mistakes, but because you corrected course while there was still time. To incorporate this awareness into your daily environment without being heavy-handed, consider subtle reminders. Some practitioners keep a small hourglass on their desk. Others set a gentle daily reminder on their phone with the question, "Is today being well spent?" The point isn't to create anxiety, but to gently pierce the illusion of unlimited time that leads to wasted days. What distinguishes memento mori from simple carpe diem, seize the day? Philosophy is its depth and sustainability. It's not about hedonistic pleasure-seeking or bucket list adventures, but about bringing death out of the shadows so it can serve as your wisest counsel on how to truly live. The integration of mortality awareness with mindfulness creates a particularly powerful combination. Traditional mindfulness brings you fully into the present moment. Mortality awareness ensures you're present for the right moments, those aligned with your deepest values rather than passing desires. One common concern about this practice is whether it creates depression or anxiety. Research suggests the opposite. People who constructively contemplate mortality report greater appreciation for life, stronger relationships, clearer priorities, and less anxiety about small matters. It's not thinking about death that creates suffering. It's the unconscious avoidance of this reality that leaves us vulnerable to living unconsciously. Marcus Aurelius captured this perfectly. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. This isn't about creating panic about imminent death. It's about using death's certainty to cut through confusion about how to live. As he also wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but rather he should fear never beginning to live." A simple daily practice to develop this awareness takes just 30 seconds. Each morning when you wake up, remind yourself that this day is not guaranteed. Not to create anxiety, but to burn away the fog of assumption that dulls your experience. Ask yourself, if this were my last day, would I spend it well? Then make your choices accordingly. For many people, mortality awareness creates not just better decisions, but a profound sense of gratitude. When you truly absorb that each moment is a gift that will not come again, complaints tend to shrink while appreciation expands. The traffic jam becomes an opportunity to be present rather than a theft of time. The rainy day becomes a sensory experience rather than an inconvenience. But mortality awareness without purpose is incomplete. It tells you that your time is limited but not how to use it. This brings us to perhaps the most practical question the Stoics asked. How do we align our finite time with what truly matters? The seventh sign of emotional resilience manifests when you begin to develop what the Stoics called tranquility of mind. Not through the absence of problems, but through the presence of something much deeper. Marcus Aurelius had a daily ritual to cultivate this quality, and I'm going to show you how to adapt it for just 4 minutes each morning. This tranquility comes from a specific practice with difficult situations. When something upsets you, it's rarely the event itself causing your distress, but rather your interpretation of it. The Stoics understood this profound psychological insight thousands of years before modern cognitive therapy reached the same conclusion. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, "It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things." This concept of impressions is fundamental to Stoic practice. When something happens, your boss sends a critical email, someone cuts you off in traffic, your partner says something hurtful, your mind immediately attaches a judgment to the raw event. These judgments happen so quickly and automatically that we mistake them for reality itself. Marcus Aurelius developed a powerful technique to counter this automatic process. Each morning, he would prepare his mind by questioning his own interpretations before they solidified. He wrote, "Today I shall meet with meddling, ungrateful, violent, treacherous, envious, and unsociable people." This wasn't pessimism, It was preparation. He continued, "But I have seen the nature of good and the nature of evil, and I know that the nature of the offender is akin to my own." This Socratic questioning technique can transform how you respond to difficult situations in just 3 simple steps. First, identify the automatic interpretation your mind has attached to an event. Second, question whether this interpretation is absolutely true or just one possible explanation. Third, consider alternative perspectives that might be equally or more valid. Let's try this right now with something that bothered you recently. Think of a situation where someone's behavior upset you. Perhaps a dismissive comment, a cancelled plan, or being ignored in a conversation. Got it? Now ask yourself, what interpretation did my mind automatically attach to this behavior? Was I thinking, they don't respect me, they don't care about me, or something similar? Now for the crucial step. Question that interpretation. Is it the only possible explanation for their behavior? What else might have been happening that you couldn't see? Perhaps they were dealing with stress you know nothing about, operating from different cultural norms, or simply unaware of how their actions affected you. Did you try it? Most people report an immediate shift in their emotional response when they sincerely consider alternative interpretations. The situation doesn't change, but your relationship to it transforms entirely. The 7th sign of progress in your emotional resilience journey appears when you start questioning your automatic interpretations regularly. You'll catch yourself in the middle of becoming upset and think, wait, is this the only way to see this situation? This mental reflex doesn't develop overnight, but when it appears, it's a clear indication that you're developing the Stoic skill of cognitive flexibility. The neuroscience behind this practice is compelling. When you reappraise a situation, consider alternative interpretations, you literally reconfigure your brain's response. Brain imaging studies show that cognitive reappraisal reduces activity in the amygdala, your emotional alarm system, while increasing activity in the prefrontal cortex, your rational decision-making center. You're not suppressing emotions, you're processing them differently from the start. This practice transforms workplace conflicts dramatically. Imagine a colleague doesn't acknowledge your contribution to a project. Your automatic interpretation might be, they're trying to take credit for my work, triggering anger and defensiveness. But when you practice questioning, you might consider, perhaps they were focused on their own contribution. Maybe they assumed everyone already knew my role, or even they might be insecure about their own value. Notice how each alternative interpretation naturally leads to a different response. Instead of confronting them angrily, you might calmly clarify your contribution at the next opportunity or have a curious conversation about how you both see the project. Same situation, entirely different outcome. I remember working with someone who would become furious whenever their partner was late coming home. Their automatic interpretation was, they don't respect my time, or they don't care enough to be punctual. Through practicing this questioning technique, they began considering alternatives. Traffic might be bad, they might be trying to finish something important, or they might have a different relationship with time than I do. This didn't make the lateness disappear, but it transformed the emotional response from rage to mild annoyance, saving countless hours of unnecessary conflict. The key to making this practice effective is genuine curiosity rather than defensive rationalization. You're not trying to talk yourself out of valid concerns. You're exploring whether your automatic interpretations are the complete truth. As Epictetus taught, it is not events that disturb people, but their judgments concerning them. A particularly powerful application is what I call the difficult person as teacher technique. When someone consistently triggers negative emotions in you, instead of seeing them as an obstacle, view them as sent specifically to help you develop patience, understanding, or communication skills. This perspective shift doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it extracts value from interactions that would otherwise just drain you. To implement this practice in high-stress moments, create visual reminders in your environment. Some people keep a small note on their desk or phone with questions like, "Is this the only interpretation?" Or, "What else might be true here?" These prompts interrupt the automatic judgment process before it takes hold. Combining this questioning practice with conscious breathing amplifies its effectiveness. When you notice yourself becoming emotionally triggered, take one slow breath while asking yourself, "What interpretation am I attaching to this event?" The physiological calm from the breath creates space for the cognitive reframing to take hold. Remember that the goal isn't to eliminate all judgments. That's impossible. The aim is to create space between an event and your reaction to it, so you can choose a response aligned with your values rather than your automatic patterns. As Viktor Frankl famously said, influenced by Stoic philosophy, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. But controlling reactions to external events is only half the equation. Even people who master their responses to the outside world often remain at the mercy of something equally powerful, their own desires and attachments. This brings us to the next dimension of emotional resilience, your relationship with what you want. Most of us live in a perpetual state of wanting, constantly chasing the next achievement, possession, or experience that we believe will finally make us content. Yet as soon as we obtain what we wanted, the satisfaction quickly fades and a new desire takes its place. The hedonic treadmill keeps spinning, and we never arrive at the contentment we seek. Epictetus, who knew something about deprivation as a former slave, offered a radical solution. Do not seek to have events happen as you want them to, but instead want them to happen as they do happen, and your life will go well. This doesn't mean abandoning all goals or preferences. Rather, it suggests a profound shift in how we relate to our own desires. The eighth sign of emotional resilience appears when you begin recognizing and transforming your automatic desires. It's what Epictetus called the discipline of desire, the capacity to want what you already have while working for what you want. And there's a specific technique for this that can be practiced in just 2 minutes per day. Instead of constantly focusing on what you lack, this practice involves deliberately limiting your comforts temporarily to reset your baseline appreciation. The Stoics regularly practiced voluntary discomfort, going without certain pleasures or conveniences, not as punishment, but as training. Seneca, despite being one of Rome's wealthiest men, regularly practiced living as if he had lost everything. For a few days each month, he would sleep on a hard mat, wear simple clothes, and eat the plainest food. Why would someone with unlimited access to luxury do this? Because he understood that our fears of losing comfort are often worse than actually losing it. By voluntarily experiencing discomfort, he inoculated himself against the fear of future loss, while simultaneously increasing his appreciation for what he had. You can adapt this practice to modern life without extreme measures. Choose one small comfort to go without for 24 hours. Perhaps skip social media, take a cold shower, eat only simple foods, or commute without your usual entertainment. The specific deprivation matters less than your mindful attention to how you respond to it. What happens when you try this? Most people report 3 surprising discoveries. First, the discomfort is much more manageable than they imagined. Second, they notice dependencies they weren't previously aware of. Third, and most importantly, when they return to their normal comforts, they experience them with renewed appreciation. This practice works because your brain's reward system habituates quickly to pleasures and comforts. What once felt like a luxury, that smartphone, that comfortable bed, that favorite beverage, soon becomes an entitled baseline. By temporarily resetting the baseline through voluntary limitation, you hack your brain's hedonic adaptation mechanism, restoring genuine appreciation for what you already have. The difference between contentment and complacency is crucial here. Contentment means being at peace with your current state while still working toward improvement. Complacency means settling for less than you're capable of achieving. The Stoic practice cultivates the former without falling into the latter. Another powerful 2-minute practice is what I call the abundance inventory. Each evening, identify 3 things you now have that you once deeply desired. Remember how much you wanted your current job when you were interviewing for it. Recall how you dreamed of your current relationship when you were single. Recognize that your present life is filled with fulfilled desires that have simply faded into the background of your awareness. As you continue these practices, you'll notice an extraordinary shift. Spontaneous gratitude begins to arise without effort. This is the 8th sign of progress, when appreciation for what you have becomes your default state rather than requiring conscious practice. But contentment alone isn't sufficient for a well-lived life. Internal peace without purpose or direction can become stagnation. This brings us to perhaps the most practical question the Stoics explored. How do we align our actions with our deepest values, especially when doing so is difficult or inconvenient? The 9th sign manifests when you begin living according to your deepest values, not just your momentary preferences. It's what Marcus Aurelius practiced daily with a specific question that, when asked consistently, completely reorganizes your priorities. This practice of transforming your desires is the antidote to the perpetual dissatisfaction that plagues modern life. Our brains are literally wired to want more and never be satisfied, a useful evolutionary adaptation for survival in scarcity, but a recipe for misery in an age of abundance. You've probably experienced this firsthand. The new phone that excites you for a week before becoming just your phone. The promotion that thrills you for a month before feeling like your baseline. The relationship that once seemed miraculous but now feels ordinary. Epictetus understood this psychological trap even while living in conditions we would consider extreme poverty. As a former slave who owned virtually nothing, he nevertheless developed an approach to desire that created more contentment than many wealthy Romans experienced. Wealth, he taught, consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. This wasn't spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity. It was a practical psychological insight about how desire actually functions in the human mind. The technique of voluntary deprivation that the Stoics practiced might sound extreme, but it's remarkably practical when adapted to modern life. Seneca, despite being one of Rome's wealthiest men, regularly practiced living as if he had lost everything. For a few days each month, he would sleep on a hard floor, wear basic clothes, and eat the simplest food. Why? Because he understood that our fear of losing comforts is often worse than actually losing them, and our appreciation for what we have diminishes without contrast. You don't need to sleep on the floor to benefit from this practice. Try a simplified version. Choose one comfort or convenience you rely on daily and voluntarily go without it for 24 hours. Maybe it's social media, coffee, hot showers, background music, or snacks between meals. The specific deprivation matters less than your mindful attention to how you respond to it. Take a moment right now to choose one comfort you could go without for a day this week. Have you thought of something? Good. Now actually schedule it. What day will you practice this? When people first try this exercise, they typically report 3 surprising discoveries. First, the discomfort is far more manageable than they anticipated. That day without checking social media. The withdrawal is real but reveals how much mental space opens up. Second, they notice dependencies they weren't previously aware of. The way they automatically reach for their phone dozens of times, or how they use certain comforts to avoid facing difficult emotions. Third, And most powerfully, when they return to their normal comforts, they experience them with renewed appreciation. That first cup of coffee after going without tastes extraordinary. That warm shower feels luxurious rather than routine. The neuropsychology behind this practice is fascinating. Your brain's reward system habituates remarkably quickly to pleasures and comforts through a process called hedonic adaptation. What once triggered dopamine and felt special, that smartphone, that comfortable bed, that favorite meal, soon becomes an entitled baseline that produces no joy, only the absence of discomfort when present and active frustration when absent. By temporarily resetting the baseline through voluntary limitation, you hack your brain's hedonic adaptation mechanism. I remember working with someone who felt perpetually dissatisfied despite having all the external markers of success: career, relationship, health, home. They began practicing voluntary deprivation once weekly, giving up a different comfort each time. After just 1 month, they described a profound shift. "I've spent years trying to increase my happiness by adding things to my life. More achievements, more purchases, more experiences. For the first time, I'm finding contentment by temporarily taking things away. The contrast makes everything I already have feel like enough." A common concern about this practice is that it might lead to complacency. If I'm content with what I have, won't I lose my drive to improve and achieve? This misunderstanding stems from confusing contentment with resignation. Contentment is being at peace with your current state, while still working toward improvement. Resignation is passively accepting less than you're capable of achieving or creating. The Stoics were anything but complacent. They were senators, generals, and emperors who worked tirelessly while maintaining inner peace. Think of it this way. Contentment is the stable platform from which effective action springs, not the absence of action. When you're not driven by insatiable craving or fear of not having enough, you can pursue goals from a place of choice rather than compulsion. The practice of voluntary deprivation transforms your relationship with material possessions and consumption. When you regularly experience being okay with less, the desperate need to acquire diminishes. You might still enjoy nice things, but you no longer depend on them for your well-being. This creates both psychological freedom and financial benefits. You naturally become more intentional about purchases when you're not using them as emotional band-aids. This practice also powerfully impacts relationships by reducing emotional dependency. When you recognize that you can be okay, even without certain comforts or validation, you bring more strength and less neediness to your connections with others. You love from abundance rather than lack, which paradoxically makes you both a better partner and more attractive to others. Try this experiment. The next time you feel a strong desire for something, a purchase, an achievement, or even someone's approval, pause and ask, is this a want or a need? Then, challenge yourself to voluntarily delay gratification for a set period. If it's a purchase, wait 72 hours before deciding. If it's seeking approval, go 24 hours without mentioning your achievement. This small delay often reveals which desires are authentic expressions of your values versus temporary urges or social conditioning. A complementary practice that takes just 2 minutes daily is what I call the abundance inventory. Each evening, identify 3 specific things you currently have that you once deeply desired. Remember how much you wanted your current job when you were interviewing for it. Recall how you dreamed of your current relationship when you were single. Recognize that your current living situation was once an aspiration. Your present life is filled with fulfilled desires that have simply faded into the background of your awareness. I invite you to try this right now. Think of 3 specific things in your life that you once strongly desired and now have. Take a moment to really remember the wanting, and then feel the fulfillment of already having these things. Did you try it? Most people report an immediate shift in their emotional state, a genuine feeling of sufficiency and gratitude that arises not from positive thinking exercises, but from accurately perceiving reality. You are currently living a life that you once wanted. As you continue these practices, you'll begin to notice the 8th sign of progress. Spontaneous gratitude arises without effort. Rather than needing to formally practice appreciation, you'll find yourself naturally noticing and enjoying what you already have. This isn't forced positivity. It's simply the natural result of a mind no longer trapped in the cycle of perpetual wanting. This practice becomes particularly powerful during difficult times. When facing challenges, we typically focus exclusively on what we've lost or what's going wrong. The disciplined practice of still identifying what remains good, even while acknowledging the difficulty, creates remarkable resilience. This isn't about denying problems. It's about maintaining a complete picture that includes both challenges and resources. The Stoics used a specific visualization exercise to develop this capacity. Imagine everything you value being taken away, one by one. Your possessions, your health, your relationships, your reputation. Feel the loss fully. Then, mentally restore each blessing, one at a time, experiencing each as a gift rather than an entitlement. This practice doesn't make you morbid or pessimistic, quite the opposite. It makes ordinary days feel extraordinary. What about ambition and growth? The Stoic approach to desire doesn't eliminate goals or aspirations. Instead, it transforms your relationship with them. You can still work toward achievements while not placing your well-being hostage to their attainment. As Epictetus taught, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. This balanced approach to desire creates what psychologists now call realistic optimism, the capacity to work positively toward goals while maintaining emotional equilibrium regardless of outcomes. You give your best effort without attaching your sense of success to factors beyond your control. A powerful way to practice this balance is through what I call process goals rather than outcome goals. Instead of setting a goal like get promoted this year, outcome that depends on factors beyond your control, set a goal like consistently deliver exceptional work and develop leadership skills. Process entirely within your control. You can still aim for the promotion, but your satisfaction comes from the process rather than hanging exclusively on the outcome. Remember that this discipline of desire doesn't happen overnight. Like any skill, it develops through consistent practice. Begin with small experiments in voluntary deprivation. Practice the abundance inventory daily for at least 21 days. Notice how your relationship with wanting begins to shift from compulsive to conscious. As this practice deepens, you'll discover something remarkable. Genuine contentment isn't dependent on circumstances at all. Even during challenging times, you can access a sense of enoughness that circumstances cannot touch. This isn't detachment from life, but full engagement with it, from a place of sufficiency rather than lack. The Stoics weren't trying to eliminate desire completely. They recognized it as a natural human function. Their goal was to transform unconscious, automatic desiring into conscious, chosen wanting. The difference is profound. One leaves you at the mercy of external triggers and internal cravings. The other puts you in the driver's seat of your own life. But contentment without purpose or direction can become stagnation. Internal peace alone isn't sufficient for a well-lived life. This brings us to perhaps the most practical question the Stoics explored. How do we align our actions with our deepest values, especially when doing so is difficult or inconvenient? The 9th sign manifests when you begin living according to your deepest values, not just your momentary preferences. It's what Marcus Aurelius practiced daily with a specific question that, when asked consistently, completely reorganizes your priorities. This question about values transforms completely how you decide what matters in your life. When we live without a clear sense of purpose or direction, we experience what the Stoics recognized as a uniquely human form of suffering, a constant, restless feeling that something is missing despite having our basic needs met. It's the existential equivalent of background noise, always there, but often just below the level of conscious awareness. Marcus Aurelius understood this profoundly. Despite being emperor of Rome, with access to every pleasure and comfort imaginable, he struggled with the same fundamental question we all face: what makes a life well lived? Each morning, before attending to the countless demands of running an empire, he would write in his journal, asking himself, "What kind of person do I want to be today?" Not what he wanted to accomplish or acquire, but who he wanted to be. A subtle but transformative shift in focus. This brings us to a powerful exercise I call the Four Virtues Compass, a practice to identify your fundamental values that can serve as your North Star for decision-making. The Stoics believed in four core virtues: wisdom, making good decisions; courage, doing what's right despite fear; justice, treating others fairly; and temperance, moderation in all things. But the specific virtues matter less than identifying what truly matters to you. Let's take 5 minutes right now to define your own North True, the values that, when you're aligned with them, create a sense of meaning regardless of external circumstances. Grab something to write with and ask yourself, when I'm at my best, what qualities am I embodying? What principles would I want to be remembered for? Don't overthink this. Your intuitive answers are often the most authentic. Did you try it? Most people identify values like integrity, compassion, courage, creativity, or growth. These become your decision-making filters, the standards against which you measure your choices, not just your outcomes. The ninth sign of progress on your journey to emotional resilience appears when you begin making difficult decisions with greater clarity. You'll find yourself less torn between options because you're filtering choices through your values rather than just weighing pros and cons. The question shifts from "what will benefit me most" to "what aligns best with who I want to be?" The neuroscience of purpose is fascinating. Studies show that living aligned with clear values activates brain regions associated with positive emotion and resilience, while simultaneously reducing activity in areas linked to anxiety and rumination. Your brain literally functions differently when your actions align with your deeper purpose. Think about how this applies to career decisions. Many people chase promotions or salary increases that move them further from work they find meaningful. The conventional approach weighs only external factors: status, salary, benefits. The values-based approach asks deeper questions. Will this role allow me to express my core values? Will I be proud of how I spend my days? Sometimes the answers align with conventional success, but often they don't. I remember working with someone who was offered a prestigious position with a significant pay increase, but something felt off about it. When we explored their core values, creativity, authenticity, and making a meaningful difference, they realized the new role would require compromising all three for status and money. They declined the promotion and instead proposed a lateral move that better aligned with their values. 3 years later, they described it as the best career decision I ever made. Not because it led to more conventional success, though it eventually did, but because each day felt purposeful rather than just productive. This values-based approach transforms not just career decisions, but all areas of life. From relationships to how you spend your free time, filtering choices through your fundamental values creates a life of integrity, where your outer actions align with your inner principles. The concept of virtue moments is particularly powerful here. Instead of seeing challenges as obstacles, you begin recognizing them as opportunities to exercise your values. A difficult conversation becomes a chance to practice courage and compassion. A boring task becomes an opportunity to embody diligence and excellence. A conflict becomes a laboratory for practicing fairness and self-control. I invite you to try this right now with something you've been avoiding. Think of a task or conversation you've been postponing. Now, instead of focusing on the outcome, ask yourself, which of my values could I practice through this challenge? Reframe it as an opportunity to embody who you want to be, not just something to get through. Did you try this reframe? Notice how it shifts your relationship with the challenge. The external circumstances haven't changed, but your perspective has, from burden to opportunity. What's particularly fascinating about this approach is how it transforms our definition of success. Most of us have internalized a vision of success based on external achievements and acquisitions, the career, the relationship, the lifestyle. But the Stoics understood that true success is living in alignment with your values, regardless of external outcomes. Think about it this way. If you define success as reaching specific external outcomes, a certain job title, income level, or relationship status, you place your sense of fulfillment hostage to factors often beyond your control. But if you define success as living according to your values, you always maintain the capacity to succeed, regardless of circumstances. This reorientation creates remarkable resilience in the face of setbacks. When you experience failure in the conventional sense, not getting the job, facing rejection, losing something valuable, you can still succeed in the deeper sense by responding to that situation in alignment with your values. I worked with someone who had built their identity around professional achievement. When they were unexpectedly laid off, they initially experienced it as total failure. But through exploring their core values, growth, connection, and contribution, they realized they could embody all three even without formal employment. They used their period of unemployment to deepen relationships, develop new skills, and volunteer in their community. By the time they found new work, they described the layoff as painful but ultimately transformative, because it had forced them to define success based on who they were, not just what they did. A powerful practice for accessing your deeper wisdom around values is what I call the inner advisor technique. When facing a difficult decision, take a few moments to quiet your mind through deep breathing. Then imagine your wisest future self, 20 years from now, who has lived aligned with your deepest values. What advice would this version of you offer about your current situation? This isn't magical thinking. It's accessing the wisdom you already possess, but often ignore in favor of short-term thinking. To reinforce your values in daily life, create environmental reminders. Some people select a specific object, perhaps a stone, a piece of jewelry, or an image that symbolizes their core values. Placing this in your workspace or home creates a visual anchor that gently redirects your attention to what matters most. The integration of values with mindfulness creates a particularly powerful combination. Traditional mindfulness brings presence to whatever you're experiencing. Values-based mindfulness brings presence specifically to how your current actions align or don't align with your deeper principles. Each moment becomes an opportunity to ask not just am I present, but am I present in a way that expresses who I want to be? One common objection to this values-based approach is the fear that it might make you rigid or judgmental. The opposite is true when practiced authentically. Clear values don't create inflexibility, they create discernment. You become less reactive to others' expectations and more responsive to your internal compass. Remember that identifying your values is not a one-time exercise, but an evolving exploration. As you grow and gain life experience, your understanding of your core values will deepen and sometimes shift. The key is regular reflection, perhaps weekly or monthly, on how your actions align with your principles and how your understanding of those principles continues to develop. This practice becomes especially crucial during major life transitions. When changing careers, ending or beginning relationships, or facing health challenges, your values provide stability amidst change. They answer the question, "Who am I?" even when everything else is in flux. Try this exercise. For the next week, set a reminder at midday to pause for 30 seconds and ask yourself, "Are my actions since waking aligned with my core values?" Don't judge yourself, simply notice. This brief check-in creates a remarkable shift in awareness and often naturally redirects your behavior without requiring willpower. As your practice deepens, you'll notice something remarkable. Decisions that once created anxiety or confusion become clearer, not necessarily easier. Living by your values often means choosing the more difficult path, but clearer. You'll find yourself making choices that others might question because you're following an internal compass rather than external validation. This clarity extends to how you use your time, perhaps our most precious and limited resource. When you filter time commitments through your values, you naturally begin eliminating activities that don't align with who you want to be, creating space for what truly matters. But living with purpose individually isn't the final step in the journey toward emotional resilience. We are social creatures, and true flourishing cannot happen in isolation. This brings us to perhaps the most profound dimension of Stoic practice, our connection to something larger than ourselves. The 10th and deepest sign appears when you begin to feel a genuine connection with something bigger than yourself. The Stoics called this cosmopolitanism, the sense of belonging to the entire human community. And there's a specific practice that Hierocles taught 2,000 years ago that I'll share now, a practice that dissolves loneliness and creates a type of resilience that nothing can shake. This connection with something larger is the culminating point of the Stoic journey. In our modern world, where individualism is celebrated above all else, we've created an epidemic of isolation that the ancient Stoics would have found deeply troubling. Studies show that despite being more connected than ever through technology, loneliness rates have doubled in the last 50 years. We're suffering not just from physical isolation, but from something the Stoics understood millennia ago: existential disconnection. Heracles, a Stoic philosopher who expanded on the work of his predecessors, developed a powerful visualization practice that remains astonishingly relevant today. He described our social connections as a series of concentric circles. The innermost circle contains ourself, the next our immediate family, then extended family, neighbors, fellow citizens, and finally, humanity as a whole. The goal of Stoic practice, he taught, was to continually draw the circles inward, to treat those in outer circles with the same concern and care we naturally feel for those closest to us. This practice directly counters our tribal instincts. Our brains evolved to care deeply about our immediate group while viewing outsiders with suspicion or indifference. This made perfect evolutionary sense when resources were scarce and strangers often meant danger. But in our interconnected world, this limitation causes immense suffering, both to others and perhaps surprisingly to ourselves. Let's practice expanding our circles of concern right now. Close your eyes for a moment if you're in a place where that's comfortable. Visualize the people you care about most, your innermost circle. Feel the natural warmth and concern you have for them. Now, gradually expand that circle to include acquaintances, people you know but aren't close with. Try to extend that same quality of care outward. Continue expanding to include strangers in your community, people across the world facing challenges, even those with whom you disagree. Not forcing false feelings, but genuinely exploring the possibility of extending concern. Did you try it? Most people report an initial resistance. It feels unnatural to care about strangers as we do about loved ones. But with practice, something remarkable happens. The boundaries between us and them begin to soften. This isn't naive idealism. It's a practical shift in perspective with profound implications for your emotional resilience. The 10th sign of progress appears when you begin feeling spontaneous compassion for strangers. You read news about suffering in distant places and feel a genuine connection rather than detached sympathy. You encounter someone with vastly different views and can see the human being behind the opinions. This expansion of concern doesn't happen overnight, but when it begins, it transforms how you move through the world. The neuroscience behind this practice is fascinating. When we consciously practice extending empathy beyond our natural boundaries, we activate brain regions associated with what psychologists call cognitive empathy, the ability to understand others' perspectives. With consistent practice, this activation pattern strengthens, making compassionate responses more automatic and less effortful. This expansion of concern transforms how you engage with conflict, particularly with those who hold different views. Instead of seeing only the opinion you disagree with, you begin to see the human being holding that opinion, someone with fears, hopes, and experiences that have shaped their perspective. This doesn't mean you abandon your principles or agree with views you find harmful. Rather, it means you engage with the person rather than just their position. Try this the next time you encounter someone with whom you strongly disagree. Before responding to their view, take 5 seconds to remind yourself, "This is a human being with a complex life I know nothing about." Notice how this tiny pause changes the quality of your response. What's remarkable about this practice is that extending concern to others doesn't drain your emotional resources. It actually expands them. This seems counterintuitive. Surely caring about more people and problems would leave us overwhelmed? The opposite occurs. When we connect with a larger human story, our personal troubles are placed in perspective, while our sense of meaning and purpose expands. I remember someone who transformed profound personal trauma into service to others facing similar challenges. They described how this expansion of focus paradoxically healed their own wounds. "When I was focused only on my suffering, it consumed me. When I began connecting with others through shared experience, my pain became a resource rather than just a burden." Their personal struggle wasn't diminished, but it was integrated into a larger narrative that gave it meaning. This points to a profound paradox the Stoics understood. Concern for others doesn't deplete us, but nourishes us. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee." Our well-being is inextricably linked with the well-being of the whole. This isn't moralistic preaching, it's practical psychology. We're designed to find meaning through contribution. A simple practice to develop this connection is what I call the common humanity exercise. When feeling isolated in your struggles, consciously reflect on how your experience connects you with others facing similar challenges. Are you anxious about a presentation? Millions share that exact fear. Grieving a loss? This universal experience connects you to humanity across time and space, not to minimize your unique experience, but to place it within the larger human story. Try this right now with something you're currently finding difficult. How does this challenge connect you with others? What universal human experience is embedded within your specific situation? Creating daily practices of service and contribution, even with limited time, reinforces this sense of connection. These don't require grand gestures. Small acts, genuinely listening to someone who needs to be heard, offering specific skills to help others, or simply being fully present with those you encounter, build the neural pathways of connection and meaning. The integration of this expanded concern with mindfulness creates what we might call compassionate presence, being fully in the moment, not just for your own experience, but with awareness of your connection to others. This contrasts with isolated presence, where mindfulness serves only personal calm. As you develop this expanded sense of belonging, you'll notice something remarkable happening with your emotional resilience. Challenges that once seemed overwhelming become manageable, not because they're smaller, but because you're larger. You're no longer facing difficulties as an isolated individual, but as part of something that transcends your individual story. This expanded identity doesn't require spiritual beliefs, though it's compatible with them. It's simply the recognition of an observable reality, that our lives are thoroughly interconnected with others in ways we often fail to notice. The air you're breathing, the words you're reading, the ideas you're considering, none of these exist in isolation. They're all products of a vast human collaboration across time and space. Try this experiment for 1 week. Begin each day by asking, how might I contribute something positive to the web of connections I'm part of today? This doesn't require changing your activities, just bringing awareness to how your existing actions affect others. Notice how this simple shift in attention changes your experience of everyday interactions. The development of this sense of connection completes a remarkable transformation in your emotional life. What began with noticing the space between stimulus and response now culminates in experiencing yourself as part of something larger than your individual concerns. This doesn't diminish your unique story. It places it within a greater narrative that gives it context and meaning. Remember that these 10 signs aren't just markers on a path. They represent real transformations in how you experience life's challenges. From noticing the pause between trigger and response, to questioning automatic interpretations, to finding perspective in difficulty, to expanding your circle of concern, each represents a specific capacity you can develop through deliberate practice. And the most extraordinary thing? As we've seen, people in situations infinitely more challenging than ours, emperors facing war and plague, slaves facing torture, leaders facing ruin, used these exact practices to develop unshakable inner strength. If they could achieve this in those circumstances, imagine what's possible for you. What makes these practices so powerful is that they're not abstract philosophy, but practical psychological tools that have been tested across centuries and cultures. Modern neuroscience is only now confirming what the Stoics intuited, that our responses to life can be trained as systematically as any other skill. The journey from emotional reactivity to emotional resilience isn't about becoming cold or unfeeling. Quite the opposite. It's about feeling everything fully while maintaining your center. It's about engaging with life's full range of experiences without being dominated by them. As Epictetus said, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Each of the practices we've explored builds upon the others. The dichotomy of control helps you focus your energy where it matters. Negative visualization prepares you for challenges before they arise. The view from above gives you perspective when difficulties emerge. Amor fati transforms your relationship with what you can't change. Memento mori ensures you focus on what truly matters. The discipline of assent gives you control over your interpretations. The discipline of desire brings contentment with what you have. The discipline of action aligns your behavior with your values. And the practice of expanding your circle of concern connects you with something larger than yourself. Together, these practices don't just help you survive life's challenges, they help you thrive because of them. This is the ultimate promise of Stoicism. Not that life will be easy, but that nothing can prevent you from developing the inner resources to meet whatever comes with dignity and even grace. I invite you to choose just one practice from everything we've explored, whichever resonated most strongly, and commit to implementing it daily for the next 30 days. Not all 10 signs at once, just one practice, consistently applied. Notice what shifts, however subtle. Remember that these transformations often happen beneath the surface of your awareness at first, visible more in your responses to challenges than in how you feel moment to moment. The Stoics understood that philosophy isn't about intellectual knowledge, but about how we live. As Epictetus put it, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." The practices we've explored aren't meant to be discussed, but lived. Their truth reveals itself not in conversation, but in application. These 10 signs of growing emotional resilience aren't just markers on the path. They are transformations that happen when you practice consistently the techniques I've shared. And the most extraordinary thing, as we've seen, people in situations infinitely more challenging than ours, emperors facing wars, slaves facing torture, leaders facing ruin, used exactly these practices to develop an unshakable inner fortress. If they could achieve this in those circumstances, imagine what you can achieve. The only question that remains is, why not start today?